Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our second CFR training webinar session for the 2022-23 fiscal year consolidated fiscal report. Yesterday's session went well, and we went over some good topics, especially in regard to the new CFRS web platform. And we also had a pretty good size crowd. That session's recording will be posted shortly along with today's session on YouTube. We will send an email out to all providers notifying them of when they are available and where they can be found. Today, we will have over 500 attendees again. So hopefully today's session is just as beneficial for you. My name is Alpa Amin. I'm one of the representatives for OPWDD and will be hosting today's webinar. Today's NOI state representative will be as follows. Representing OSS, Paul Green, Paul Sutton, Lisa Vickery. Representing OMH, Michelle Zielinski, Sean Griffin, and Hoffman. Representing OPWDD, Francis Vasillo, Kenneth Glinmeyer, Alpa Amin, and Emily Sewell. Representing SED, Catherine Cochran, Mackenzie Bisler. Representing DOH, Jeffrey Nickerson. This slide is important, and hopefully you have had the opportunity to check out the previous Q&As that have been posted on OMH website. We strongly encourage all attendees to ask questions through the Q&A function in the webinar. It is on your right-hand side of your screen, and you might have to click the arrow next to the Q&A to open up the dialog box. If you don't see it, click the three dots at the bottom right of the WebEx and then click Q&A. We will not be answering questions today, but plan on answering all the questions and posting answer online along with the recording of this webinar so that everyone can get the benefit of this webinar and questions asked. When you have a question, this slide shows how to contact each agency. Most of us are still working hybrid schedule, so all the agencies still prefer email contact. New York State Office of Children and Family Service Providers may submit questions regarding their CFR submissions to the OMS CFR unit. New York State Department of Health Providers may submit questions regarding their CFR submissions by email to DOH address listed on the slide. Any claim questions can go to the following. As noted on the previous slide, email would be the preferred method. By end of this seminar, we hope to accomplish the following goals. Provide NYS agency contact information for specific questions not covered during this training session. Identify any major changes that have occurred since the release of the July 1, 2021 through June 30, 2022 CFR manual. Discuss important policies, principles, and rules regarding completion of the CFR via CFR web. Provide guidance regarding the completion of the COVID-19 and COVID-19S information schedules. Help providers become familiar with the claiming and supplemental schedule. I will now pass on the presenting to our first panelist for today's session.
Hi, my name is Emily Seward from OPWDD, and I will begin today the Utilities menu in CFRS Web. The following functions shown here can be found on the Utilities menu. Oops, sorry, did not change the slide, I apologize. So shown right here are the functions that can be found in the Utilities menu. You will notice on this screenshot that the Submit button is grayed out. This function will not be available until the CFR has passed all final validations and a DCN has been assigned. Also note that this function is only available to CFRS users that have been assigned the submitter role. In the DMH1 to DMH2 transfer, to begin selecting programs, you will first need to select the appropriate state agency from the drop-down up top. Next, select the programs you would like to transfer. Below, either select percentage or units of service for the program allocation. Last, select the county from the drop-down and enter the percentage or units of service and hit the Transfer Programs button. If you need to add a county, click the Add a County yellow button at the bottom. Next is the Import Data from Text File feature. To begin importing, select the Import File type from the drop-down. You will then be able to browse your desktop to select the file. Once the correct file has been selected, you can click the Import button. More information on how to format and import data from a text file can be found in the Help feature, which can be accessed at the bottom of the menu in CFRS Web. The Export to CSV function will create a spreadsheet from the entered CFR data. Click the Schedule and then the Export button. A file will then show at the bottom of your screen. You would then open that file to see the newly created Excel report. You can then save the Excel to your own desktop or edit the report. Next is the Change/Delete Funding Source function. The program codes will already appear here to edit. You would click the pencil to edit and the trash can to delete. After the CFR has passed all final validations, a DCN will be assigned. The DCN stands for Document Control Number and will be associated with all schedules of the CFR, including the certification pages. Uploaded certification pages must have the same DCN as the submitted CFR. Depending on agency-specific requirements, new certification schedules may need to be submitted on revised CFR submissions. More information on resubmission requirements can be found in Section 2 of the CFR manual. When all required info has been inputted into the CFR and you are ready to submit, you must first go to the Validate Submission/Assign DCN function. Press the Final Validations and Assign DCN button to begin this process. You cannot submit a CFR without passing the final validation. If the CFR does not pass the final validations, it will generate a list of errors that will need to be addressed or corrected in order to assign a DCN. To view an error, simply click on the listed error and it will bring the user to the error in the corresponding schedule to correct. Once all failures have been fixed, begin the validation process again, selecting final validations and assign DCN. If the failures are not fixed, no DCN will be assigned, thus you will not be able to submit the CFR. If there are no failures and the CFR passes the final submission stage, the screen here will appear listing the newly assigned DCN, and now the user can submit the CFR. After passing final validations and a DCN has been assigned, you will be able to go back to the utility menu, and the submit option will now be available to use. though it should be noted that only CFR web users that have been assigned the role of submitter will be able to access. Once you have a DCN, you do not need to submit immediately. If for whatever reason you are not ready to submit, the file will be stored in the work in progress under the status of DCN assigned but not yet submitted. In the submission function, click on the CFR with the DCN that has not been submitted yet. From there, the user can view submission, edit submission, or submit submission. Again, only a user with the submitter role assigned to them can submit a submission. If that button is grayed out, then that user does not have the ability to submit a CFR. The ability to submit can also be accessed directly in the Utilities menu under Submit. If your CFR has passed final validations and has been assigned a DCN, select the correct CFR and click Submit Submission. The user will then have to confirm the submission. If so, a confirmation that the CFR has been successfully submitted will show. After a CFR has been submitted, it can now be viewed in the submission dashboard, which is located under the menu under Home. To revise the CFR that has already been submitted, go to the Utilities menu and select Update Submission. From there, the user can check or uncheck the appropriate boxes to add or remove state agencies. Then click the Update Submission section. A warning will then appear to remind the user that adding another state agency will require programs and sites to be added and all other related data. In respect to removing a state agency, that action will result in all programs and sites related to the deleted state agency to be deleted. If you wish to continue, you would then select yes. If you need to edit your state agency selections, then select no. Please note that if there is already a work in progress for that reporting period with those state agencies, you will need to delete the duplicate to move forward. To view or print any schedule, you can select Print Schedule from the Utilities menu. Before any certification schedules are printed to be signed and uploaded, please make sure that the correct DCN number associated with your CFR submission appears on the certification. And this function can be found in the Utilities menu. If you scroll down, there are more print options to use, including expense total by program type, revenue total by program type, and inventory. If you need to print or view data for just one state agency or a few, you can print that info under Advanced Print Options by selecting the appropriate state agency. Please note that all data that is associated with a specific agency will print when utilizing this option. If you are having trouble printing, you may have pop-ups blocked. When you hit the print button, you will notice that on the top right corner of the screen, there is a notice that pop-ups are blocked. It's usually on the address bar in most cases. If you click on that, there is a box that you can check to allow pop-ups for the CFRS web. And with that, this concludes the utility section, and I will now be passing it off to the next speaker.
Thank you, Emily. Good morning. My name is Sean Griffin, representing the Office of Mental Health, and I will be discussing general changes, highlights, and any specific changes for the Office of Mental Health, Department of Health, and Office of Children and Family Services. Any changes from the previous CFR menu are detailed in the recently released fiscal year CFR transmittal letter. The transmittal letter can be found on the SED link below. Please keep in mind when carrying forward data, changes to funding source codes or program codes may need to be updated. The next two slides highlight a list of internal controls provided by the New York State Office of Mental Health's Bureau of Audit to assist you in preventing and detecting fraud. A KPMG fraud survey found that organizations are reporting more experiences of fraud than in prior years, and that 3 out of 4 organizations have uncovered fraud. Some internal controls include reconciling agency bank accounts every month, and providing the Board of Directors oversight of agency operations. Others include protecting petty cash funds and protecting cash and check collections. For more detailed information, please use the following OMH website link. The recordings of prior year CFR training presentations are available at the following YouTube links. Additionally, the current CFR training presentation will be added to the OPWDD YouTube page at a later date. The written responses to the Q&A from the current CFR training presentation will be added to the OMH website at a date to be determined. These responses, as well as previous Q&As, can be found at the link below. Over the next few slides, we will discuss the general changes to the CFR manual. Section 8 of the manual was updated as follows. The FAQ related to the OPWDD Workforce Stabilization Initiative was amended to reflect both Phase 1 and Phase 2. The FAQ related to PPP loan forgiveness was updated to include OMH and OASIS specific information. Lastly, a FAQ was added with instructions on how to report the New York State Healthcare Worker Bonus on the CFR. Agency-specific FAQs will be discussed later in the respective agency-specific section of the presentation. This slide shows a screenshot of the FAQ regarding the Healthcare Worker Bonus Program. The FAQ provides guidance on how the Healthcare Worker Bonus is reported on full and abbreviated CFRs. Please note, government entities are exempt from completing the CFR 2A and the reconciliation. As a result, they do not report the Healthcare Worker Bonus on the CFR. Additionally, the bonus is not reported in Article 28 or many abbreviated CFRs. Section 11 regarding the CFR II and CFR II was updated as follows. Language was added to exclude the newly added overtime informational lines in the attestation. The bullet below shows the new language. The CFR II and the CFR II was also revised to add line B to the attestation and updated the definition of the CPA firm registration number. Section 14 of the CFR manual was updated as follows. The following line numbers of the CFR 2A were changed. Property and equipment, net, debt, current portion, and long-term debt, net of current portion, were renumbered because of the addition of the following lines. Right of use assets, lease liabilities, current portion, and lease liabilities net of current portion. The line number changes are listed. This screenshot depicts the changes discussed on the previous slide. The renumbering and additions to lines 9, 12, and 13 can be seen here with descriptions. Section 16, CFR 4, Personal Services was updated as follows. Column titles were revised from hours paid and amount paid to total hours paid and total amount paid. Also, the following informational-only columns were added: overtime hours included in total hours paid, overtime amount included in total amount paid, average hourly rate, and annualized salary. The screenshot shows the updates made to CFRS Web to include the column title changes and the informational-only columns. As discussed yesterday, e-sign certifications must be uploaded through CFRS Web and the checkbox attestation must be selected. This attestation will be provided during the upload stage of the CFR certification pages. E-sign certifications will not be accepted unless they are uploaded through CFRS Web. Below is the signature attestation for the certification pages found on CFRS Web. OMH supplemental changes and highlights. The New York State Office of Mental Health, pictured below, is found at 44 Holland Ave in Albany, New York. There are 4 specific OMH supplemental schedules: the OMH-1, OMH-2, OMH-3, and OMH-4, which we will discuss in more detail. The OMH-1 schedule is used to report the total units of service by OMH program site. Providers can use Appendix F of the CFR manual to find units of service details for each OMH program. Units of service are very important to us. They are used to determine the cost per unit of service for financial planning. The units of service reported on the OMH-1 transfer to the CFR-1 and DMH-1 on the appropriate lines. The units of service on Schedule OMH-1 must match the aggregate totals of units of service reported on DMH-3 for the same program. Pictured here is the OMH-1 from CFRS Web. To report units of service, select a program and site from the drop-down boxes. This process will be repeated for each program. CFRS Web will automatically save the data. Please keep in mind, the OMH-1 is only completed for OMH programs that file a full CFR. OMH-2, Medicaid Units of Service by Program Site. OMH-2 is completed for program sites that accrued Medicaid fee-for-service or Medicaid managed care revenue and should be reported separately for each. The units of service reported for FFS and MMC will transfer from the OMH-2 schedule to the CFR-1 on lines 13A and 13B, respectively. Lastly, Medicaid units of service on the OMH-2 should not be more than the Medicaid units of service reported on OMH-1. The next few slides include screenshots from CFRS Web. The OMH-2 Medicaid units of service is completed for OMH programs that file a full CFR and have a program sites eligible to build Medicaid. The OMH-2 schedule is set up similarly to the OMH-1, except each line has an A and a B to track units of service separately for Medicaid fee-for-service revenues and Medicaid revenues received as part of Medicaid managed care. As you can see, each line has an A and a B. Here, we can see the lines associated with day treatment on the OMH2. Lines include brief day, half day, full day, and collateral, home, and crisis visits. Lastly, we can see the lines for each crisis stabilization center and other residential. To delete a program from the OMH2 schedule, click the Delete button pictured on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. When the Delete button is clicked, the following box will appear. Clicking OK will delete the program, or click Cancel to return to the screen. Schedule OMH3 client information. Enter the number of clients served by the program. Please note, this may differ from the number of admissions because a person can be admitted more than once. The caseload at the start of the current period should equal the caseload at the end of the prior period. Here is a screenshot representing a program without an ongoing caseload. The OMH3 captures the number of persons served by the program and site for the year. Lines 1 and 4 will be 0, but lines 2 and 3 should indicate the same number. These numbers will show how many people were seen and how many people left. Here is an example of a program with an ongoing caseload. Here, the numbers reported may vary. Schedule OMH4, unit of service by payer by program site. The first screenshot shows the lines associated with payers. Next, we see the lines corresponding with safety net. OMH specific changes. The name of program code 2100 has changed to Mental Health Outpatient Treatment and Rehabilitative Services, also known as MOTRS. Next, instructions are added to multiple sections of the fiscal year 2023 CFR manual that are specific to public school districts, PSDs, that file an OMH CFR only. Schedule CFR2, column 9, does not need to be completed by a PSD that files a CFR for OMH only. Additionally, schedules CFR3, CFR4, and the agency administration worksheet are optional. If a public school district chooses to complete any of these schedules, the data reported should be related to the OMH programs only. Instructions were added to Section 1 that indicate a provider that is authorized to operate an OMH program through a designation process is required to file an OMH CFR. Section 3, reporting periods. This was updated to add guidance for public school districts that are funded by OMH via a direct contract and file an OMH-only CFR. These public school districts may use the period of the contract as the standard CFR reporting periods. Section 8, general instructions. OMH-specific information was added to the FAQs regarding the PPP loan forgiveness. Please note, in February 2022, OMH issued a memo that provided additional guidance for the reporting the PPP on the OMH claiming schedules. PPP reported on CFR1, line 79 federal grants should also be reported on Schedule DMH2, line 24 federal grants. The PPP loan forgiveness is then adjusted from revenue on the claim schedule by entering the amount of loan forgiveness on the DMH2 line 39, Other, on the predefined line. A FAQ was added that states program code 0780 Special Mental Health Care Management should report activities on a single site program code on the OMH CFR for providers operating multiple 0780 programs. Also, a FAQ was added regarding the reporting of OMH Federal Medicaid Assistance Percentage, FMAP, on the OMH CFR. This slide summarizes the FAQ regarding FMAP from the CFR manual. FMAP funding that is dispersed to OMH providers as a Medicaid service rate increase for one of the following programs is reported as Medicaid fee-for-service revenue on the CFR. Additionally, OMH FMAP grant awards that are dispersed via state aid contract or purchase order are reported along with match expenses on a full CFR and abbreviated CFR on Schedule CFR 2, Column 9, and are not reported on a mini abbreviated or Article 28 abbreviated CFR. In addition, FMAP funding is not reported on Schedule COVID-19. Additional information can be found at the link on the screen. Update to Section 22, DMH2. The predefined line, community residents exempt income owed to OMH for current period, has been deleted from line 39, other non-GAAP adjustments. Changes to Section 36, Appendix C, County Codes. The instructions for OMH County Codes 63, 64, and 80 were updated. The following changes were made to Appendix F. OMH Program Code 2600 CPEP Crisis Beds was deleted. The OMH Program Code 8350 PROS Employment Initiative was added. In addition to the name change for Program Code 2100, which was previously mentioned, OMH has also revised the description for the program in Appendix X. OMH has added the following DMH funding source codes to Appendix N: 039B, 046E, 048M, 079, 140F, and 503A. Also, DMH funding source code 074, Child and Youth Crisis Residence, has been revised. Appendix Q, Guidelines for OMH Residential Exempt Income. The instructions for Medicaid exempt income were updated to reflect changes that apply to OMH community residence programs. The Medicaid exempt income recoveries were waived for providers that operated a community residence program in calendar years 2017 to 2022 and for fiscal years 17-18 to 22-23. OMH providers should continue to use MHPD to submit corrections, openings, and closures of programs. The programs and sites reported on your CFR should match our concerts database. Attachment A is automatically generated and mailed with each desk review letter. It compares the programs listed in our database versus what you reported on your CFR. Any discrepancies must be resolved. Supplemental block grant and FMAP funding. Various legislation has provided additional monies to assist with COVID relief that include the Community Health Service Block Grant and the Federal Medical Assistance Percentage Share of Funds for Medicaid programs. Supplemental funding opportunities are available to eligible providers to assist with the recruitment and retention initiatives, educational expenses, and career development. The funding requires quarterly reporting to OMH in addition to the CFR. The Supplemental Block Grant and FMAP funding website link provided is a valuable resource linking providers to additional funding opportunities and specific instructions. Next, we will discuss the Department of Health highlights, supplementals, and changes. Department of Health highlights. DOH providers are required to complete a full CFR submission, including the following schedules below, and report any programs listed in Appendix HH. The program site identification number is comprised of the first 4 digits of your agency code, followed by the first 3 digits of your program code. Units of service are defined in Appendix HH for each DOH program. Integrated Outpatient Services Clinic. On the CFR, the iOS clinic is reported under program code 2100 for OMH, 3520 for OASIS, and 1580 for DOH. An allocation between these agencies must be made if the provider operated both OMH and OASIS clinics prior to being designated as an iOS clinic. Programs are required to maintain support demonstrating a reasonable method of allocating cost. Please refer to Appendix GG for further instructions. The next 2 slides list the changes made to Appendix HH in the manual. Please review the slides for name modifications made to the listed program codes. In addition to the name changes, the Department of Health has also modified the program description for the following programs listed: 2390 and 2400. Office of Children and Family Services highlights, supplementals, and changes. Please note, OCFS providers may submit questions regarding their CFR submission to the OMH CFR unit. OCFS providers are required to complete a full CFR submission, which includes the following schedules listed below. OCFS programs are listed in Appendix II, and services must be reported on the CFR. The program site identification number is comprised of the first 4 digits of your agency code, followed by the first 3 digits of your program code. Units of service are defined in Appendix II for each OCFS program. That concludes this portion of the presentation, and I'm now going to pass off the microphone to our next presenter.
Thank you, Josh. This is Paul Sutton from the Office of Addiction Services and Supports. I'll be talking to you about OASIS changes and highlights. This is a picture of our office located at 1450 Western Ave in Albany, New York. Now, it is important to submit your CFR by the due date required, and any CFRs that are not submitted on time are subject to various penalties and sanctions. These sanctions may include the imposition of fines, withholding of advance payments, and the suspension or revocation of your operating certificate. Once becoming compliant and submitting your CFR, any withholding of state aid that has occurred will then be released and returned to you. Here are different various departments, and our contact information. If you have any budget questions, reach out to your budget department or the CFR review unit. Here's our contact information, or if you have questions about, receiving your state aid or, any of your funding, then, reach out to the claims department at the address below. A CFR submission is not complete without the submission of the required certification schedules and audited or reviewed financial statements. A new CFR I, III, and IV will need to be submitted for each new DCN that is uploaded. Also, we don't need a new II for every new CFR submitted, but we will accept an attestation reporting your minor changes in lieu of the additional II. We request that all signature pages be submitted electronically through the CFRS web. Additionally, the providers must keep your original signature certification schedules and attestation statements corresponding to those emailed for the required retention period and must be able to make these documents available upon request. However, we will also accept emailed PDF files of the CFR I, II, III, IV, attestation, and financial statements. If emailing the certifications, please use the naming convention listed here for your file name. If the DCN number does not match the DCN number of an uploaded CFR, it is of no value to us and will be rejected. OASIS providers are responsible for updating their own contact information in the provider directory system, which can be found at the below link. Any time of staff changes, contact names, email addresses, and phone numbers should be updated. This will ensure that providers and programs receive important communications from the OASIS Communications Office, as well as providing current contact names and phone numbers. OASIS highlights and changes. Section 2 of the CFR manual has been updated with the submission requirements. The OASIS-only submission matrix has been updated to include providers that operate at least one certified and/or funded OASIS program. Section 8 in the general instructions has been updated. The FAQ related to reporting PPP loan forgiveness on the CFR was updated to include guidance for OASIS claiming schedules. Section 21, the introduction to DMH consolidated claiming, has been updated. The instructions for the CFR3 calculations of OASIS non-reimbursable costs were updated to include both positive and negative vacation leave accruals to the extent that the result is greater than or equal to 0. Section 22. The DMH2, line 11, the OASIS reporting guidance for the total share of agency administration allocation was updated to include per program the amount reported on the DMH2 line 11 cannot exceed the amount reported on the DMH1 line 12. You can always adjust to decrease that amount on the DMH2, but you cannot increase. For the DMH2 line 44, the OASIS only instructions were updated for programs that receive state aid. For direct contract reporting, the total of your state share on line 44 and local government share on line 45 should equal the net operating cost on line 43. For local contract reporting, please consult your county representative as their requirements for lines 44 and 45 may be different. On line 45, the OASIS-only description has been modified. You should report the amount of local government or public funds that are considered maintenance of effort support of the net operating cost. Local government funds are funds raised by the county through a tax levy or other means. In the DMH2, line 48, the OASIS-only instructions have been updated for programs that are funded and non-funded. Programs that do not receive state aid should report the program deficit or surplus. A program surplus is reported as a negative number. Programs that receive state aid in the form of a direct contract should not be using line 48. As stated in the previous slide, you should be using your lines 44 and 45 should equal 43. If you receive state aid in the form of a local contract, consult with your county representative on how to report on line 48. Appendix E has been updated as well. The following OASIS-only programs have been added to CFRS Web. Program 4081, Non-Medical Transportation, 4082, Capital Improvements, 4083, Outreach Services, and 4084, Jail-Based Services. Section 47, under Appendix N, for DMH funding source codes. The following OASIS-only funding source code index was added. 13J, New York State Drug Treatment and Education for Adult Use Cannabis. This is OASIS only. Starting in 2021, OASIS received 2 supplemental awards under the Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment SAPT Block Grant through CRF and ARPA, collectively referred to as Fiscal Year 21 SAPT Supplemental Grant Awards. Providers are required to report this as follows. On the course schedules, report the expenses on the CFR-1 for direct costs and CFR-3 for administrative costs. The revenue should be reported on the CFR-1, line 79, and DMH-1, line 25, under federal grants. Under the claiming schedules, you report the expenses in the respective category, and the revenues would be reported on the DMH-2, line 24, as SAPT supplemental. Be aware that because the contract period for the SAPT supplemental grant funds does not always coincide with the standard funding period, you will report the expenses and uses of the funds on the claiming schedules of the reporting period in which they occur. As a result, you may report expenses and revenues with the SAPT supplemental grant funds in more than one reporting period. State Opioid Response, or SOAR, is a federal grant, and we expect it to be reported as such. SOAR is awarded by the Department of Health and Human Services, which is an available line in the detail box in the CFR-1, line 79, federal grants. Similar to the SAPT grant, the SOR grant should also be reported on the DMH-1, line 25, and DMH-2, line 24. OASIS allows agency-paid employee licensing or credentialing fees for the purposes of workforce development and retention and addiction programming to be claimed for reimbursement. In order to ensure accuracy, the Fiscal Audit and Review Unit, or FARU, will perform virtual visits, and the CFR Review Unit will perform desk reviews of the CFR submissions. Any areas that need additional explanation or revision will be detailed in a CFR review and emailed to the provider. Failure to respond to the review may lead to withholding of funding or revocation of your certification. Accurate and complete CFR data for OASIS programs is critically important for OASIS fiscal policy development and analysis. Cost report data is also requested and used by other New York State agencies and the federal government for a variety of different purposes. The following are some examples of items covered in our reviews. Our supporting documents such as signature pages, financial statements completed and submitted. Have you reported all of your active programs? If applicable, have the units of service been reported, and do they reflect what is reported on your MSDS reports? Does the CFR2 column 1 line match your financials? Furthermore, is the reconciliation completed? Have you completed the CFR3? Note if line 38, parent agency allocation is completed, has the allocation been submitted? Are all non-allowable expenses reported on the CFR1 line 40 or CFR3 line 17 adjusted out accordingly on line CFR1 line 66 or the CFR3 line 41? Are the hourly equivalents in the CFR4 within reason? The hourly equivalents are arrived at by dividing the total amount paid by the total hours paid. Once the core reports, the CFR1 through the DMH1 are complete, and if any of your programs are funded, Then from the bottom of the DMH1 screen, select the DMH1 to DMH2 transfer button in order to begin the creation of the claiming schedules. Please note that if you do not use the transfer to DMH2 option, it is highly likely you will be underreporting your expenses on the DMH2. Any property and equipment details will only calculate correctly if you use the DMH1 to DMH2 transfer button. After transferring the data, you can still make manual adjustments to the DMH2 if required. We would not expect adjustments to be made in the reporting for the personal services, fringe benefits, and OTPS expense categories unless there is also a change in method of accounting. However, adjustments are likely for the remaining categories, the vacation leave accruals. First, the CFRS Web will not transfer vacation leave accruals from the core and is considered non-reimbursable. Therefore, they will automatically be adjusted out and you do not have to do that manually. For the equipment and property expenses, the following adjustments are allowed: the addition of an expensed item in the period it was purchased, and the subtraction of a non-reimbursable expense such as depreciation, interest expense, real estate taxes, and mortgage expenses. CFRS Web has been updated to include drop-down detail boxes in order to individually list the adjustments from the core. Choose either a predefined line or select Add a Line. For each row of data, select either addition or subtraction to individually list the addition of a fully expensed item or the subtraction of a non-reimbursable expense item. The net amount of these program expenses will transfer to the respective DMH2 line 9 for equipment or line 10 for property. Again, as stated previously, if you do not use the DMH1 to DMH2 transfer button, these drop-down boxes will not calculate correctly. This is a screenshot of the equipment drop-down box. I've added vehicle and equipment depreciation, and they've added the purchase of a copier. For property expenses, the drop-down detail box looks like similar to this. You would subtract your building depreciation, administrative expenses reported on the CFR3 must be prorated to determine the OASIS portion to be adjusted out of the claim on the DMH2 line 12. The prorated share for each program is derived by first dividing the program's total operating cost from the CFR1 line 64 by the total agency operating expense found on the CFR3 line 53. We then multiply the total of the non-reimbursable costs reported on the CFR3 by the percentage calculated in step 1. Then, lastly, report this amount on the DMH2 line 12 for the specific program. DMH2 line 12 is used to report other than property and equipment non-reimbursable expenses, as well as the prorated percentage of non-reimbursables from the CFR3 agency administration expenses. Early retirement incentive payments, or ERIP, and severance pay. These expenses should be reported fully on the core reports and the claiming schedule, then adjusted out of the claim on the DMH2 line 12 as non-reimbursable. An expense as considered non-reimbursable for a provider would also be considered non-reimbursable for a related party. Therefore, any depreciation expense or mortgage interest expense noted on the CFR 5, Section C, under columns 4, 5, and possibly 8, which was used to validate the expense in Section B, may need to be adjusted out as non-reimbursable, either fully or partially, based on the source of the expense. And this is what the CFR 5 looks like, with those potentially non-reimbursable costs. Once the CFR review unit has sent out a review email, a response is required. If you agree with our findings, the CFR should be revised and validated. Obtain a new DCN number and submit it in PDF format along with your written response. Once we have confirmed the corrections were made, you will then be asked to upload the CFR and submit the required certification pages. If you do not agree with the findings, please provide additional explanation along with supporting documentation and clarification of your position. Now, this concludes the OASIS-only portion of our presentation. I will now pass this along to our next speaker.
Hello, my name is Francis Vasilio. I work in the CFR unit of OPWDD. For a couple of our programs, the reporting is a little different from the rest. First off, for supervised IRAs, program code 0231, aside from reporting all the units of service that you provided, you're also allowed to report in the CFR all the retainer days and therapeutic leave days that you billed for when you complete the CFR. For respite programs 0311 and 0312, some of you may have some per diem billing. When you report on the CFR, you should convert each per diem day of service into 96 quarter-hour units of service. Just to make life more complicated, we're required to have you report some of our programs on a site-specific basis. You see the list of programs requiring that at the top of the slide. Generally, direct reporting of expenses is preferred. We understand that when you're reporting by site, that may not always be practical. You may have a building with 2 or 3 units with different, where you're providing different IRA services, for example, and you've got the same staff providing services in the different apartments. In that case, we refer you to Appendix FF, where we give you some preferred methods for allocating some of your costs for that building. So you heard Paul say, or you heard it said previously, that for some of the agencies, the penalties that are assessed are refundable once you come into compliance. That is not the case for OPWDD. If you miss the filing deadline, and by miss, I mean we didn't receive everything that's required, you may be subject to a 2% penalty on your billing, EMEDNI billings. If you miss it by 3 days, you're going to be penalized for that whole month till the end of the month. And then it gets really serious. So for you June 30 CFR filers, the deadline is December 1st. If you still haven't completely filed by February 1st, the federal government is going to withhold their support for your program, which is half the rate, half the funding for your rate. So you're going to be subject to a 50% penalty on your billing. What's going to happen is you're going to bill to EMEDNI, you're going to get nothing. Then you're going to submit the rejected billing to OPWDD, and we'll give you our half of it. So these are very serious. Some agencies have actually gone out of business, providers, because they missed that second deadline. So as far as OPWDD is concerned, it's really important that you structure your whole process make sure that you've got everything complete in advance and so that you can file on time. Another new twist for OPWDD. You're always required for all the state agencies to submit a new CFRI signed by the executive director whenever you resubmit a CFR. For OPWDD now, if you want that corrected CFR to be utilized in setting rates or generating any additional funding for worker bonuses or anything like that, that revised CFR has to be recertified by your CPA. You may decide that it's not worth it to you. In that case, I would still suggest you make the corrections, submit the CFR so that it's in the CFR system, and send the CFRI, because then next year, when you bring forward the data from the previous CFR to start your next one, you'll at least have everything correct to start off with, all the programs the way they're supposed to be and so forth.
How you doing? How's that? How you doing, Dave? How you been?
If you're utilizing residential reserve for replacement funding for, say, a freestanding respite program, it's important that you report those expenses separately from the freestanding respite in program 0294, for example. You report the expenses there. If you don't report those expenses separately in the RRR program codes, you risk having that funding removed in future years. There's an FAQ for the Workforce Stabilization Initiative. Now, you'll recall that you're going to report that revenue that you receive in CFR-1, line 94, other. There's a predefined line labeled ARPA, mirrored ARPA funding. Now, we started this with phase 1, which was extra funding for your 200 level direct care staff. We've now added phase 2, which provides extra funding for your support staff, the 100 level people, and your clinical staff, the 300 level staffers. So make sure that you track this extra funding you receive that you're passing along to your staff, and you report it correctly. Now, you also, when you report it, the revenue there, you report the expense along with the regular personal service expense for the program, but then you also report it on CFR 1, line 68, F or H, and the fringe benefits, the extra fringe benefits that go along with that extra payroll cost would be reported on CFR G or I. That's all for CFR 1. Now, in the DMH schedules, if you've got some of this funding, you should not report the revenue or expenses for the Workforce Stabilization Initiative at all. Instead, you should leave it off, and then you'll have an expense variance, as what you report in the DMH 2 and 3 won't match. And there's you should enter workforce stabilization payments as the explanation on the variance line. Again, CFR 1, line 68, these are all lines used by OPWDD. They're information lines. for different programs, for different different instances. The example, the picture we have here, the slide, we didn't have H&I available to us yet to be able to show it all. Now, part of it is if you're receiving extra funding in your reimbursement rate for day treatment, day ab, or the pre-vote programs, if you want to continue to receive that extra funding, you need to follow a procedure for reporting that. The first step is to report your expenses. If you're contracting out with a transportation company, it's easy. You just fill out program 0880, and you list what you're paying that other service, and that's pretty much all your expense. If you're using your own staff and or vehicles, you're going to fill out program code 0670, itemize all those expenses for providing that transportation. Then you're going to allocate that expense back to, say, the day-hab sites where it's utilized or the pre-vote program, and you're going to allocate using CFR-1, line 68B for that to-from expense. CFR-1, line 68D, if you have property expenses for your program, and most have it, and there's actually separate property expenses for the administrative offices for that program. Let's say it's a two-story building, you're operating a program on the first level, and you've got the administrators of the program on the second floor. In that case, you're supposed to use line CFR-1, line 68D to report the portion of that building's expenses that are for the administrators separately. It's just an information. It's not subtracted from the overall property expense for that program. But the amount of that property expense that's for the administrators is here. Now, if the administrator of your program has just got a cubicle on the side of the floor, part of the floor where you're operating the program, you're not necessarily going to have separate property expenses, and you don't have to worry about that. Line 68E, always a favorite. The feds wanted to find out how much money they were being billed for day services for the people in your ICFs. So if you operate an ICF, you have to list on line 68E the amount you billed for day services to Medicaid, and also if you subcontracted out those day services to another provider agency, you need to contact that agency to find out how much they billed Medicaid for their services. And then you report that total of your own billing and the other agency's billing on line 68E. Again, that only applies to ICF operators. We have line 68F that I mentioned before. This is that phase 1 for the direct care workers at the 200 level. You're going to report the amount of your personal service costs that you've reported already on line 16. You're going to report that on, is it line 16? On your personal service is going to be reported here on 68F. And if you have, and then the associated fringe benefit costs that go with that are going to be reported on line 68G. For phase 2, it's the same thing. Any of your added personal service expenses related to the 100 and 300 level staff that is funded through the Workforce Stabilization Initiative. You're going to give us the amount of that personal service that was reported on, you're going to give it to us on line 68H, and the benefits to go with it on 68I. If, and this is probably the last time we have to worry about this, but if you were operating an ICF and during the whole COVID thing, you started providing services with your own ICF staff, day services for the individuals, you're going to operate those services in code, you're going to report those in 0093. Now, the confusion came because providers did not receive notice that they were going to be able to bill for this and how it was going to be handled until in 2022. Some of these services were provided in 2021. You should report when in the CFR that corresponds for when the services were provided, regardless of when you received the payment or the notice of payment. When you're filling out program 0093, since you're already housing these people in your ICF, you may have a little bit of extra expense for supplies and just an allocation of the staff time and their personal services. OPWDD has 3 supplemental schedules to be completed. The first one, again, is for those who operate ICFs. You're going to answer some questions about the ICF. If you mark an X in column 2 or 3 regarding medical supplies, then you get to complete OPWDD 2, where you answer some questions about the medical supplies and the payments and the costs and so forth. OPWDD 5. Once again, this was initiated by the feds. There are 7 programs that require the completion of an OPWDD 5 per site if you're dealing with a site-reported program. You see the listing there of the programs that are involved. This is what OPWDD 5 looks like. Column 1 is where you're going to list the information, how much extra funding you received for property. Now, this is given to you at the OPA site administered by the Department of Health, where they post your rates. You would list that there. Then you would list the expenses that go along with that extra funding in column 2. Column 3 is just a hint for you where you would find those expenses. Now, not everything reported on that line in CFR-1 is necessarily related to that extra funding you got, but whatever is, you should report in column 2. Column 4 will calculate on its own. It's the difference between columns 1 and 2. Column 5, then you will use the drop downs to give explanations for the difference. It may be more than one explanation. If your expense is greater than the extra funding you received, your explanation is going to be unfunded. If your expense is less than the extra funding, there may be an explanation such as a timing difference on depreciation or something like that. New for this year, we have 2 new programs at OPWDD, 0270, Vocational and Employment Goods and Services. This is a governor's initiative coming out of DOB, and 0271 are ARPA-funded contracts. where we're using some of that ARPA funding to directly contract with providers to provide certain services. Eliminated from the CFR for this starting this reporting period is program 0065 start services. We have new funding source codes for those two new programs up above, 161 and 193. You can see they track with the new programs that were created. We made a change on line 68F and 68G. We now added the description of the lines to say phase 1. Previously, there was only one initiative, so since we have phase 2 now, we changed the names of those lines in the CFR. We also made similar kind of changes to the drop down for CFR 1 line 94. We now have, instead of just saying ARPA, mirrored ARPA funding, we have one for phase 1, and we've added a second drop down line for the phase 2 revenue that you're receiving to pass along to your staff. And finally, CFR 1 line 68B, that's what I talked to you before. This is so important for you to receive your extra funding for the to from transportation. And so we've added this as one of the specific sites that your CPA has to audit test because if the information comes in incorrectly, it could result in a significant hit on your funding. And rather than to go through that over and over again, we're trying to get more focus on it by both the staff at your agency and also by your CPA. I'm gonna, before I pass along, I just wanted to interject something that I'm gonna ad-lib it for a second. We're finding a lot of problems with people when they import data into the CFR. Make sure that you don't import data onto a non-enterable line, sometimes like a subtotal line or whatever, because that can lead to some problems with the CFR. So now I'm going to pass this along to the next presenter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mackenzie Beisler from the Rate Setting Unit at SED, and I will be going over SED highlights, supplementals, and changes. Penalties for late submission. For SED provider, the interest expense on working capital loans for late filers of required financial information will be reimbursed on a prorated basis if submitted within 90 days of January 1st for July to June filers, or within 90 days of July 1st for January to December filers. No interest expense will be reimbursed for entities that file cost reports more than 90 days after January 1st for July to June filers, or July 1st for January to December filers. Non-reimbursable interest expense will affect the tuition rates for the tuition rate year 2 years after the report year associated with the required financial information and will apply to all tuition rates for that year. Prospective, appeal, reconciliation, adjustments, rates, and financial audit. Here's a link to our website. We have manuals and forms, correspondence, certified tuition rates, and online data. And you can register for access to CEDFIN, which is the State Education Department Finance Information System, here via the link. SED supplemental schedules. There are 2 supplemental schedules specific to SED. The SED-1, Program and Enrollment Data, and the SED-4, Related Services. SED-1, Program and Enrollment Data. This schedule is to be completed by all service providers requiring tuition rates from the New York State Education Department for school age and preschool programs. This schedule should also be completed by the service providers operating infant programs. The top half of the SED1 collects student enrollment by program by full-time equivalent, or FTE. Report total FTEs by funding source on SED1 lines 100 to 107. Report the total days the program operated on SED1 line 109, number of days in session. These enrollment figures should correspond to the tuition revenues reported on line 69 and/or 88 to 92 and/or line 94 of Schedule CFR 1. Enter the number of days in the full-time program during the September to June school year and the number of days in the full-time program during the preceding July and August if the program was approved to operate during that period. The September to June school year must be at least 180 days. The July to August summer program must report a minimum of 30 days. For Special Education Itinerant Services, also known as SEIT, on SED1, line 111, mandated CS or SEIT units provided report billable units, half-hour units, on the basis of enrollment as mandated by students' IEPs. Comparing this number to the billable SEIT units as reported on CFR 1, line 13 is a measure of efficiency. Report the actual IEP mandated half-hour units of service provided for all special education itinerant services, SEIT, on SED1, line 115, actual CS or SEIT units provided. Calculate care days by multiplying total FTEs by session days. Mandated SEIT units of service should be reported by the county in the appropriate program to the student's IEP. Individual 9135 to 9319 or group 9140 to 9149. Additionally, the mandated unit of service should coincide with the actual provided unit of service. For example, if a student's IEP indicates they are mandated for a group session, their unit of service should be reported in 9140 to 9144. If they receive services in a group of 2, or in 9145 to 9149, if they receive services in a group of 3. Actual provided SEIT units of service should be reported on a per session basis, non-prorated. For example, a half-hour unit SEIT session with 3 students should be reported as 1 unit of service. Enrollment is reported as a full-time equivalent, FTE. A student is counted as full-time, or 1 FTE, unless admitted after the start of the school year, or discharged before the end of the school year, or determined to be legally absent. FTE is calculated based upon weeks enrolled divided by the number of weeks the program is in session. And you can refer to Section 32 of the CFR Manual, page 32A. Student FTE is also prorated when a child is in a program for less than 5 hours. FTE is calculated by the number of hours in the program divided by 5 hours. Full-day programs are 5 hours of instruction. Care days are used to calculate a per-day tuition rate, which is used in the rate-setting methodology. Care days are established by multiplying the student FTE times the session days in the school year. So for example, 25 students times 180 days and 25 students times 30 days will equal 4,500 plus 750, which equals 5,250 care days. Refer to the CFR manual for examples of student enrollment FTE calculations. When reporting student enrollment FTEs for students with one-to-one aides, include the student FTE in both a 9230 program and the program the student is enrolled in. SED1 lines 201 to 903 details the total number of classrooms operated and the student FTEs enrolled by program for each SED approved classroom ratio, which should agree to the program approval letter in effect for the CFR year. So students to teachers to aides. For special class in an integrated setting programs, do not include non-disabled students in your ratio. For example, a program approved as 15 to 1 to 2 with 1 special education teacher and 1 paraprofessional for 7 disabled students and 1 paraprofessional for 8 non-disabled students, report the ratio as 7 to 1 to 1 and not 15 to 1 to 2. And this is a sample of an SED1 for calendar year filers. Now I will discuss the related services, SED4. The SED4 is broken down into 3 sections: capacity, need, and productivity. The SED4 is required for all rate-based programs except for CIT programs, program codes 9135 to 9149. SED4 not required if the only special education program a service provider operates is the CIT program, programs 9135 to 9149. Schedule RS2 does not need to be sent to SED. However, please retain a copy of this schedule for your files. An Excel version of the RS2 schedule is available at the link provided on the Rate Settings Unit website under Manual and Forms. SED providers should use the data compiled on the schedule SED4 to report the CFR4 information for direct care related service staff. And here is a sample of a completed SED4. RS2 information. Data from the RS2 feeds into the SED4. These forms are used to determine the capacity, need, and productivity of related services for school-age and preschool special education programs. Instructions to RS2 may be found on RSU's website at the link provided. Complete a separate RS2 for each related service type. Schedule RS2, column 6A, total by therapy type, report sessions in half-hour blocks of time. Prorate is needed. For example, 45 minutes would equal 1.5 sessions. Schedule RS2 has a new column, column number 13, annual IEP mandated related service sessions not provided due to telepractice accessibility issues. Report sessions not provided due to accessibility issues related to delivering services via telepractice. And I'm now going to hand this off to the next presenter.
Thank you. This is Sean Griffin again from OMH, and next we will discuss the COVID-19 schedule. The COVID-19 schedule is a supplemental schedule developed to help understand the economic impact of the pandemic on each provider. This independent schedule is required for all CFR submission types and agencies except for SED. SED providers are required to complete the COVID-19 schedule, which will be discussed later. Lastly, the information reported on the schedule does not transfer to any other CFR schedule. The instructions for the COVID-19 schedule can be found in Section 33B of the CFR Manual. As a reminder, the schedule must be completed using the accrual basis of accounting. In addition, while the schedule is not subject to certification, it should be reviewed for reasonableness. The purpose of this schedule is to report increases in program administration and program site expenses and revenues during the reporting period that are a result of COVID-19. Please report expenses incurred and revenues earned for the reporting period on the appropriately defined lines. If there is no applicable line, report the expense or revenue on the other line. For OPWDD, program type reporting only is required for this schedule. This schedule includes three sections: general information, program site data, and personal services. The three sections can be seen in the provided image. Each section has its own tab and data requirements detailed in the CFR manual. Pictured here is the General Information tab, which shows the related questions. The next few slides will detail the questions asked in the General Information tab. The first question asks if your agency has received the first and second draws from the Paycheck Protection Program. The answer to this question will prompt the next set of questions. If yes, you will be directed to complete additional follow-up questions. If no, CFRS Web will advance you to the question number 3. As mentioned, if your answer to 1A is yes, you will be prompted to answer additional questions regarding the PPP loan. Some examples include the total amount received, the date received, and if the loan has been forgiven in the current reporting period. If the loan has been forgiven, we request that you provide the amount forgiven in question 2C. Question 3 reports on the total amount of revenue and gains on the extinguishment of debt recorded during the reporting period that was due to COVID-19 funding, grants, loan forgiveness, contributions, awards, and tax credits. Some items included in total revenue and gains include COVID-19 grants from federal and/or state agencies, counties, and private foundations. In addition, the amount of PPP loan that was forgiven and recorded as revenue or as a gain on the extinguishment of debt, federal tax credits, and donations resulting from the pandemic should also be reported. After completion of the General Information tab, please complete the Program Site Data tab, which requires specific program site data. Before entering the program data, the user must select the state agency, the program, and the site from the drop-downs. Expenses reported within this section must be related to the pandemic. These expenses are over and above normal agency expenses. Expenses include, but are not limited to, personal protective equipment, personal services, temporary housing for COVID-positive residents or exposed staff, cleaning services and machines, telecommunication, storage facilities, interest on debt, and FEMA. FEMA costs for emergency medical services include emergency medical care for COVID-19 patients, emergency operation centers, facilities, meals and supplies for emergency workers, medical supplies, and training. For further information, please review the program and policy guide provided in the link. Next, we move on to the program site-specific revenue. The revenue section should only report COVID-19 funding that was recorded as revenue during the reporting period. There are many sources of revenue, such as the CARES Act loans, program rate changes, COVID-19 grants awarded by federal, state, or other governmental agencies, donations, and COVID-19 federal tax credits. Please be aware that federal grants will be reported on line 64 using the predefined entries. Some examples include the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, PPP, Economic Injury Disaster Loan Emergency Advance, FEMA, and the Federal Communications Commission. The last tab of the schedule is used to report personal services. Similarly to the Program Site tab, the user must select the agency, program, and site from the drop-down arrows before entering data. Required data includes position, standard work week, hours paid, and amount paid. Personal services should only be reported if they were incurred in the responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. The personal services reported will be entered in the same manner as the program site specific section of the CFR4. All total personal service expenses entered will transfer to line 1 of the program site data section on the second tab. For additional information, refer to the instructions of Schedule CFR4 located in Section 16 of the CFR Manual. And now I'm going to pass off the microphone to the next presenter.
Hello, this is Mackenzie Beisler again with SED. I'm going to go over the COVID-19S informational schedule. The COVID-19S is required for all CFR submissions from SED providers and is completed independent from the other CFR schedules and the COVID-19 schedule. The COVID-19S schedule is used to report the net changes in program administration and program site expenses and revenues in the reporting period on a program site specific basis that are specifically related to COVID-19. The information reported on this schedule should be the net changes in expenses and revenues determined by the provider to be related to COVID-19. For additional information on how to complete the COVID-19S schedule, please refer to the instructions in Section 33C of the CFR Manual. The COVID-19S schedule will not be subjected to certification, but should be reviewed for reasonableness. This is a sample of what the 19S questions will look like. The questions deal with the Payroll Protection Program loans and if those loans are forgiven. Complete the questions in the General Information section of the COVID-19S schedule. For question 1A, select yes or no. If yes, proceed to question 1B. If no, proceed to question 3. For question 2A, select yes or no. If yes, proceed to question 2B. If no, proceed to question 3. If you select yes to question 4, please make sure you are reporting the appropriate expenses and revenues on the COVID-19S schedule. If you are a multi-funded agency, you will need to report the SED data separate from the other agencies that you are reporting to. COVID-19S expenses. Personal services, program site, and program administration. The personal services section of the COVID-19S schedule is completed in the same manner as the program site specific section of Schedule CFR4. For each position title code that is added to a program site, the standard workweek is selected, and the hours paid and the amount paid are entered. The total personal services expense for each program site transfers to line 1 of the program site data section of the COVID-19S schedule. For additional information on how to complete the personal services section of the COVID-19S schedule, please refer to the instructions for Schedule CFR4 located in Section 16 of the CFR Manual. This is a screenshot of the COVID-19S from CFR Web. Contracted direct care and clinical personal services. The Contracted Direct Care and Clinical Personal Services section of the COVID-19S schedule is completed in the same manner as the program site specific section of Schedule CFR4A. The data for each program site transfers to line 20 of the program site data section of the COVID-19S schedule. For additional information on how to complete the Contracted Direct Care and Clinical Personal Services section of the COVID-19S schedule, please refer to the instructions for Schedule CFR4A located in Section 17 of the CFR Manual. And here is another screenshot of the COVID-19S from CFR Web. Other than personal services or OTPS expenses reported on this schedule should be the net change in expenses determined by the provider to be related to COVID-19. Some examples: if food costs were down because children were remote learning, line 6 of net change in costs incurred by the program site in providing meals and/or snacks to the program site participants would reflect a negative amount. If supplies and materials, non-household, increased because the provider bought additional PPE or personal protective equipment, line 21 on COVID-19S would reflect the amount of PPE costs only. If any of the program site specific or program administration non-allowable costs have been included on schedules CFR1 through CFR5, they should also be included on line 51, adjustments non-allowable costs on COVID-19S schedule. Report the details of adjustments to reported costs by program site along with the corresponding amounts and line number where the cost is reported on schedule CFR1. Refer to Appendix X for more information regarding non-allowable expenses. And please note that negative entries are not allowed on line 51. Here is another screenshot. It's of the COVID-19S on the CFR web. COVID-19S revenues. Report in the revenue section of the COVID-19S schedule only the net change in revenue and gains on the extinguishment of debt recorded in the period that were related to COVID-19. For the following line items of revenue, only report the revenues received after netting out any negotiated contractual adjustments. Line 53, participant fees. Line 59, other third parties. For example, Agency XYZ Inc. has a published fee of $105 a visit for the provision of medically supervised outpatient chemical dependence services. XYZ Inc. has contractually agreed to $75 per visit for patients covered by the Healthy Life Inc. health insurance company. For every billable visit by a person covered by Healthy Life Inc., XYZ Inc. will report $75 in revenue, not $105, with a $30 adjustment to revenue. Here's a screenshot of the COVID-19S on the CFR web. Lines 55, 56, 57, 58, 60, 61, and 62 are not applicable to SED. And with that, I am now going to hand this over to the next presenter.
Hi, everyone. This is Paul Green from the New York State Office of Addiction Services and Supports. We're going to begin with the SUPP-1, which is the upper payment limit schedule. The SUPP-1 schedule collects data for use in the upper payment limit UPL calculation. UPL is a federally limited limit placed on fee-for-service reimbursements of Medicaid providers. Hospitals and federally qualified health centers are exempt from completing this SUPP-1 schedule. All other OMH, OASIS, and OPWDD providers who complete a full CFR and operate any of the following program types must complete the SUPP-1. Providers who fail to submit CFRs or submit inaccurate or incomplete information may lose any supplemental UPL payments they would otherwise be entitled to. So this is a screenshot of the SUPP-1. You'll see it starts out with, are you a hospital or federally qualified health agency, health center? If the answer is no, then you have to complete this. You put in your state agency, program, site. The MMIS billing number automatically populates. Then you would fill in the 3 of the 4 columns: total visits, gross revenues, and net patient revenues. The 4th column, adjustments/allowances, is automatically calculated. Report the number of total threshold visits by the payer. For purpose of the schedule, a visit is defined as including all services provided to a patient on the same day. The big thing about threshold visit is if the client came to a counseling session in the morning and then came back to a group session in the afternoon, it's still only one threshold visit for that day. So it's not the number of procedures, it's just one procedure or one visit per day. Okay. The rest of this goes into who the visit would be with, and I'll let you read that on your own. For OASIS opioid treatment programs and such under ambulatory patient groups. So generally this paragraph says, again, it's not the billing, it's not how many times you bill for a client, it's how many times the person crosses the threshold, and again, only one per day. Okay, so if you were billing once a week for a person that came in 5 days, it would still be 5 visits. And then the bottom paragraph is about bundles, which is actually the opposite. I don't believe this is very popular, but this is actually the opposite. This is the number of billing sessions, not the number of actual visits. So I'll leave that for you to ponder. I will also say, as a note, telepractice, telepsychiatry, and telehealth services are all counted as threshold visits. And Section 33A of the CFR manual offers additional guidance on the SUPP-1 reporting, including the units of service reported on dual payer claims. Okay, the remainder of this presentation is directed towards agencies that submit a claiming document, a DMH-2 and DMH-3. If your agency does not, then you may leave at this time. So agencies that file a claiming document include those receiving state aid, local aid in the form of net deficit funding. Agencies that do not file a claiming document include OASIS, OMH, OPWDD providers that do not receive any state aid for any programs, or SED, DOH, and OCFS providers. Okay. So again, we're going on to the claiming. And if you receive state aid, you should stay. If you do not receive state aid, or if you're SED, DOH, or OCFS only, then you can leave at this time. And if you're not sure which you are, just stay. It's only another 20 minutes, and it is important to understand claiming. Okay. So, first thing I will say about the budget modifications. If you haven't done so already, compare your projected expenses and revenues to your approved budget now. If it appears a modification to your approved budget is required, consult the Funding New York State Agency for guidance. So, this is the screenshot of the DMH-1. At the bottom, you've completed the core reports. The core reports were the CFR-1 through the DMH-1. You're satisfied with your core reports. They match your financial statements. You feel good about it. So now it's time to begin your claiming documents. There's 2 ways to do this. You can either click on this button, DMH-1 to DMH-2 transfer, or you can go directly to the DMH-2 and direct input, okay? OASIS requires you transfer, okay? OASIS requires it, and all the other agencies probably strongly prefer you to transfer it. It is the way to make sure that nothing gets left off, okay? Once you click that button, you get to this screen, and it says, first of all, pick the state agency, and then pick which programs you wish to transfer at this time. Okay, there's 5 programs. I only want to transfer 3 of them. I want to transfer them by percentage. That's the common way. And I want to transfer them to the County of New York, 100%. And then I just click transfer, and those 3 will go to a DMH2 under New York 31, 100% of each of the programs. Okay. If I wanted to come back and then transfer the remaining 2 to a different county, I could come back and do so. I could just change the county to the Bronx, and I could change those 2 and transfer 100% of them to another one, to another county. There's also a trick here. I don't know if it happens very much in the New York City region, but sometimes in the smaller counties of upstate, they'll transfer 50% to one county and 50% to another county. Okay. If you want to, that's what you would use that Add a County button for. Now, this is telling you that there's already data there. So by transferring it, you're going to be overriding it. And the answer is yes, and that's okay, because every time you transfer it, now there's data there, but if you go back and you make a change, you'll have to retransfer it again. Okay. This is saying that it was successfully transferred. However, some of the detail lines need to be updated. Okay. So what that means is that the total transferred for this, like line 17A, Medicaid fee-for-service, the total transferred over, the 449,918. However, the drop-down box did not transfer over. So for any of the ones that have drop-down boxes, the total will transfer, but the drop-down detail will not, and you'll have to go in and add that information. In case you forget to do this, when you go to validate, it'll remind you. So it's an easy enough thing to remember. All right, now that everything has been transferred, you're at the DMH2. You have to start by selecting the state agency. You've already selected the county and the program. Now you want to tell it whether it's a direct contract or a local contract. So a direct contract is with a state agency. It's with the state of New York. Okay, and again, this is for OASIS, OMH, and OPWDD. If it's a local contract, the money goes through the local government unit. Okay. State contract starts with a C0 generally. Local government contract could be anything that the local government comes up with. And if they do not have a specific one, or you do not know of one, you use the first 7 digits of the local government unit, the county's name. So for New York, it'd just be New York with no space. Okay. You also have accounting methods to choose from. Again, the core report was all accrual accounting. Well, when it comes to the claim, it can be accrual, which is what most people submit, but it could also be modified accrual or cash basis. If it's going to be modified or cash basis, if it's going to be different than the accrual, you're going to have to get the county's approval for doing that. So keep that in mind. Program type and program code will automatically populate. Personal services automatically transferred over because you used the transfer button. Fringe benefits transferred other than personal services. So, and then equipment, property, and adjustments. So these are examples of drop-down detail boxes. Now that's not for all state agencies. But for OASIS, they have a drop-down detail box. Okay, and we've already discussed how you can go in and make additions and subtractions to those detail boxes. Then you end up with your total adjusted expenses. Total adjusted expenses, and then your next tab will be revenue. So that was your expenses. Here's your revenue. You start with your revenues. You've got several different types: Medicaid, managed care, Medicare, other third parties. Again, here was your Medicaid fee-for-service, and that had a drop-down box, so you'd have to go in and write base Medicaid for $449. Now, next tab, or next section of the revenue tab includes federal grants, state grants, and net deficit funding. Okay. Federal grants have been very popular lately. That was all the SAPT grants and many other grants. If you click on the down arrow, the drop-down box, it'll show you a list of suggested federal grant providers. State grants, there are some, there's no doubt about it, but generally if the money's coming from the state, it's net deficit funding. It's not a state grant, okay? So that's net deficit funding. This is the money that the state gives you. And net deficit funding, aid to localities revenue. This funding occurs in different ways as described below. The amounts reported on this line should be determined by one or more of the methods below. Monies either received directly from New York State through a direct contract with the state, or monies received from a local government unit, county, and state funds through a contract between the LGU and the service provider. Do not include the provider share voluntary contributions in this amount. Okay. You can also, okay, let me go on to the next slide. The next slide is GAAP adjustments to revenue and non-GAAP adjustments to revenue. You can refer to Section 22 of the CFR Manual for additional guidance regarding this. After adjustments to revenue is deficit funding, and that'll be followed up by expense variance. All right, deficit funding. So here is line 44, state share, 45, local government share, 48, non-funded. Those are the three main ones. Okay. This is complicated. It's handled differently by different agencies, so I'm going to read a little bit to you. And not only is it handled differently by different agencies, but it's also handled differently whether it's a direct contract or a local contract. This is, by the way, the handout that we sent to you had speaker notes attached to each of the slides, and this is all written down in those in that handout in the speaker notes attached to the slide. But what it says is line 44 is equal to the state share. Line 45 is for county tax dollars only. Okay. And under that it says OASIS for funded programs with a direct contract. The total of state share, line 44, and local government share, line 45, should equal net operating costs, line 43. For funded programs with a local contract, consult your county representative. So for direct contracts, lines 44 and 45 should equal line 43. And for local government contracts, you're going to speak with your county representative because it appears that the different counties are handle it a little differently. Okay. Line 46, providers voluntary contribution. OASIS provider programs line not enterable. 47 is a subtotal. Line 48 is non-funded. OASIS section, OASIS non-funded programs report the program deficit positive or surplus negative. Funded programs with a direct contract should not use line 48. Again, funded programs with a direct contract should not use line 48. Funded programs with a local contract should consult their county representative. OMH, this is the surplus or deficit of funding over expenses. DMH2, line 43, less line 47. OPWDD, indicate the amount of all other funding used to support the net operating costs, which does not fall into lines 44 through 47 above. Okay? And then line 49, total deficit funding must match line 43. So again, it's a little complicated. Feel free to reach out to your state agency or your county representative if you run into any issues or questions or concerns when completing the DMH2 lines 44 through 49. Okay. Expense variance is the last tab on the DMH2, and basically it's asking to explain any of the variances between a DMH1 and a DMH2. So let me back up and say what would be a legitimate difference between a DMH1 and a DMH2. So if they're both using the same accounting method, I wouldn't expect personal services to change, fringe benefits to change, other than personal services to change. However, I would expect equipment, property, and vacation leave accruals to be changed when you're going from the core, the DMH1, to the claim, DMH2. And the reason is the core is used for fiscal analysis. When you're doing fiscal analysis, you like to not have peaks and valleys. So that's why we depreciate expenses over a certain amount of time so that it stays consistently across the analysis. However, when it comes to a claim, you're being reimbursed for the money you spent. So that is why you had this large expense this year and you want to be reimbursed for it fully. Therefore, the difference between the core and the claim is when you go to the claim, you transfer the numbers to the claim, then you go to the claim, you remove all the depreciation, and you add the expensed equipment, okay? That's the same for property. You'll remove the depreciation and you'll add the expensed property. So you put in a new parking lot, okay, and you want to be reimbursed for that full amount. So that's the difference. And then over to the right here, explanation of variance, we just want you to explain to us why there's a difference. And in this case, say adjustment for equipment depreciation. By the way, this will take a lot of characters, but you do not need to write a story. I had somebody recently wrote in a paragraph. Honestly, I'm only looking for 5, 6, 7 words, short sentence, okay? And if you forget to do so, you'll get this error code saying explanation of variance should not be blank. So that's an important feature to keep in mind. All right. At the bottom of the expense variance tab is change county, define DMH only programs, and delete. Okay. Change county. Current county is New York, but you want to change it to the Bronx. Simple as that. Click on this and enter the new county. Click on update, and you're done. The reason I say this is because a lot of people don't do this. They'll go back to the DMH2 and they'll change it there. And the problem with doing that is then you'll be left with 2 counties. You'll have New York and the Bronx. Okay, so this is the best way to do it, change county. If it turns out that you forget to do that and you add a second one by accident, you'll be able to, I'll show you how to delete in a minute. Okay, so after you update it, okay, you're all set. Now, here's the second thing. This is called define a DMH only program. I don't see it very often. We used to, there was a program a long time ago, and this would only be as if the county requests you to do something like this, okay? So you don't do it because you think it's the right thing to do. You do it because somebody requests you to do it. If they want you to take some of the expenses and the revenues out of your program, out of your one column of information, and put it into a second column to separate the program into 2 separate columns, that's how you would do this. You would define a DMH only program, okay? So you would select the program, and then you would enter an index code, your own index code. And you would basically be creating a separate column on the DMH2, okay? And you would have to complete it like we did before, the direct contract or local contract, recounting method, state contract, and such. But then you would complete it, and say you put in $50,000 of expenses on this column of information, and you put that, then you would just go back to the initial column and remove the $50,000, because combined, the reporting should equal the total that you're looking to obtain. Okay, so I won't go too much further into it now because, again, it doesn't happen very often. But what's important to know here is that the software is flexible. If somebody asks you to do something, there is a way to do it, even if you don't think there is. You may just have to touch base with one of us at the review units to go through it directly. Okay. And if you want to delete a DMH2 for some reason, you did a bad job on it, it doesn't look good, you would go to the program site definition area where you could thereby edit it or delete it right from here, okay? So if you want to delete a DMH2, now on the old desktop, it was very difficult to delete DMH2s, but now it's very easy, so that's a nice feature, okay? And this is telling you how to delete it, and when you do it, they'll come up with a warning box. Are you sure you want to do it? And the answer is yes, and you're done. So in summary, the DMH2 is completed on a New York State agency and county-specific basis. The method of accounting must be indicated over each column containing fiscal data and can be reported on a full accrual, modified accrual, or cash basis of accounting. Direct or local contract types must be selected, and contract number must be entered for each reporting period. This is for state aid funding only. It's not required for for-profits, SED, DOH, and OCFS only programs. Okay. OMH would like to note, if any programs are state aid funded, then all programs operated must be reported on a DMH2 and DMH3. Okay. So again, OMH says if any programs are state aid funded, then all programs must be reported. OASIS says if any programs are state aid funded, then all programs must be reported on DMH2 and DMH3. However, if no programs are state aid funded, then completion of the DMH2 is not required. So keep that in mind. And finally, OPWDD, DMH2 and DMH3 schedules are not required for programs funded by Medicaid without additional state aid. Okay. Direct contracts generally start with a C0. If there is no local contract number, enter the first 7 letters of the county name. And if the county name is 7 letters or less, enter the complete county name. Agency administration is distributed between New York State agencies using ratio value allocation methodology. Within OASIS and OPWDD schedules, the software calculated ratio value must be used. Equipment may be expensed rather than depreciated. Equipment costing $5,000 or more per unit and have a useful life of 2 or more years must be reported on line 9. Additional details is required in the reporting of revenues on the other lines, 29, 33, and 39. Line detail box are provided for the following revenues. And when transferring data from the DMH1 to the DMH2, CFRS Web only transfers the line detail box totals. The detail information must be re-entered into the drop-down detail box. Okay. DMH2 is not automatically updated. So in other words, if you transfer data from the core to the claim, then you submit it, and you get a review letter from one of our agencies saying you have to make some changes to the core. You have to change the CFR1 or the CFR4 information. Okay, then if you'll have to retransfer that information from that core to the claim, because if not, it won't be updated. All right. So remember that anytime you make changes after you transfer it, anytime you make changes to the core data, if you want those changes to show on the claim, you would have to transfer it again. DMH3, aid to localities, direct contracts. This is all about funding source. So the money came to you, and it came from the state or the local government, but it came from a specific source, and we like to keep track of what source the money came from. Okay. You start out by selecting the agency, the county, and the program, and then you select the funding source. Okay. Now, there's a nice thing here, this asterisk next to funding source and county. If you click on that, it will bring the previously used counties to the top of the list because there's a lot of counties and you don't want to have to thumb through the list, okay? So that's a nice feature to click on that asterisk, brings them to the top of the list, and as long as it's a commonly used one, you'll be able to select it quickly, okay? Same thing here. You selected a funding source, and then you have to do the direct contract or local contract. I believe that's automatically filled for you, but in case it's not, or in case there's an issue, that has to match whatever you input on the DMH2. Okay, so if it's direct on the DMH2, it's got to be direct on the DMH3. This information is in gray, which means it came over automatically. So what you're filling in is the white section. Now, number of persons served per year. Not all programs require that. And if you have questions about that or numbers of units of service, you can consult with Appendix E, F, and G of the CFR manual. That could give you some more information about that. So let's see. The big thing to note here are three things: change county, change funding source, and delete funding source. Okay. So again, I said it before with the county, if you want to change the county, and I do this every time when I'm making the sample, I use the calendar year sample and I update it to a fiscal year, and I have to go in and I have to change all the counties from Niagara County to New York. So it's a good way of doing it. If you don't do it, you'll end up with both Niagara and New York. So you just click on change county, enter the new county, hit the update, and you're done. Okay. Change funding source. If you had 013S and now for some reason it's changed, you click on that, add the new funding source, hit the update, and you're done. If you don't, you're going to have two. You're going to have both 013S and the new funding source code. And then when it comes time to validate, it's going to be a problem. And if that happens, then you can go to utilities. Emily talked about earlier, utilities in the menu. That's where you do a lot of these special things. And you'll see one of them will say update, change, delete funding source code. Okay. So, and then finally, if you want to delete a funding source code, you can delete it from here. So you can click on it, sure you want to do it, yes, and you're done with that. All right. Here's 013S. Here's 8,800 units of service and 751,000 of total expenses. But over here on the right is 10,800 units of service and 771,000. So this is a running total for all the funding source codes for this program, okay? And basically what it's saying is that there must be another funding source code because this isn't equaling that. So you go to the next slide. This was 013S, and the next slide is 090S. So there's two funding source codes for one program, and this is 2,000 units of service, and combined with the other one makes the 10,800. Okay, and $20,000 of expenses combined makes the total. All right, so just so you understand, you can have more than one funding source code for a program. Long time ago, I had people, they would submit different columns of information because they were trying to use only one funding source code per, but in this case, you can have more than one funding source code per program, okay? If the numbers don't match up, you'll get this error code. Program totals for adjusted expenses must equal this, but it's only this, or it's only this, but it must equal this. So this is very easy. Makes it very easy to fix. All you have to do is change it to whatever it tells you to change it to, okay? So error codes will stop you from validating, but the DMH3 is very easy to complete. All right, so in summary, for OASIS and OMH, the contract number and type indicated for each program will be transferred to the DMH3. And for OPWD, at least one contract type and type, state or local combination indicated for each program on DMH3 must match the information indicated for the program on DMH2. DMH3 is completed on a near state agency and county specific basis. Funding source codes are found in Appendix N of the CFR manual. Contract numbers must be entered. Contract type must be designated. For each funding source, enter the person served per year, units of service, total adjusted expenses, applied net revenues, and net operating cost. Just so on a side note, net operating cost is total expenses less your revenues except for state aid. Your applied net revenues, which is all revenues less state aid. So total expenses less all your applied revenues without taking into effect state aid is your net operating cost, and that's how that's calculated. Total adjusted expenses. So this is showing where the DMH2 matches up to the DMH3, and this is another way of saying it. Total adjusted expenses for the DMH3 line 16 must equal DMH2 line 13. So that's it for my part. I'm going to hand it back to Alpa.
Thank you, Paul. Health function. Help function. When in doubt, use help function. We believe this will be a useful tool, especially CFR Web is new to everyone. Within the menu function, at the bottom, you can find the help icon. A PDF file with the help contents will open in a separate browser tab. You can also click on the help icon next to the schedule name. A PDF file specific to the schedule will open in separate browser tab. Thank you once again for participating in the CFR training webinar for fiscal 2022-23 consolidated fiscal report. In case you missed the beginning of the webinar, please take the time to fill out the post survey after you leave the event. It will help us make this training better. This webinar has been recorded and will be posted online shortly. An email will be sent out notifying you of the location. The Q&As will be carefully reviewed and answer will be posted online as soon as possible. Thank you.